is Alex, and I'm a pretty ordinary guy. I work a 9-to-5 job, live alone in a small apartment, and spend most of my free time either watching TV or hanging out with friends. Nothing out of the ordinary ever really happens to me, which is why what I'm about to tell you is so terrifying. It all started on a Tuesday evening. I had just gotten home from work and was looking forward to a quiet night. I grabbed a beer from the fridge, plopped down on the couch, and fired up my gaming console. About an hour into my game, my phone buzzed with a text message. I paused the game and picked up my phone, expecting it to be one of my friends. It was an unknown number. The message was simple. "Do you remember this?" Attached was a picture of me. I was tied to a chair, my face bruised and bloody, looking terrified. I felt a chill run down my spine. I had no memory of this picture being taken. In fact, I had no memory of ever being in that situation at all. I stared at the picture, trying to make sense of it. Was it some kind of sick joke? I texted back, "Who is this? Where did you get this picture?" A few minutes later, another text came through. "Do you remember this?" Another picture. This time, it showed me with a gag in my mouth, my eyes wide with fear. I felt my stomach turn. This couldn't be real. I would remember something like this, wouldn't I? I called my best friend, Kyle, and told him what was happening. He tried to calm me down, suggesting that it was probably some kind of elaborate prank. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. The fear in my eyes in those pictures was too real. Over the next few days, the texts kept coming, each one more disturbing than the last. Pictures of me with cuts and bruises, my clothes torn, my face twisted in agony. I went to the police, but they didn't take me seriously. They thought it was just a prank, maybe even something I had staged myself. I started to doubt my own sanity. How could I not remember any of this? I hadn't been drinking heavily or doing drugs. My life had been completely normal up until those texts started coming in. One night, I decided to stay up and keep watch, hoping to catch whoever was behind this. I sat in my living room, my eyes glued to the door, my phone in my hand. Around 2 a.m., my phone buzzed again, another text from the unknown number. "Do you remember this?" This time, it was a video. My heart raced as I hesitated to press play. When I finally did, my blood ran cold. The video showed me in what looked like a basement, tied to a chair. A man in a black mask was standing over me, holding a knife. He spoke in a deep, distorted voice. "You don't remember, do you, Alex?" the man said. "But you will." The video cut off, leaving me in a state of panic. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't go to the police again. They wouldn't believe me. I felt trapped and helpless. The next morning, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I started researching online, trying to find anyone who might have experienced something similar. I stumbled upon a forum where people shared stories of bizarre and unexplainable events. I posted my story, hoping someone could give me some answers. A few hours later, I received a private message from a user named Watcher. He claimed to have experienced something similar and offered to help. Desperate for answers, I agreed to meet him at a coffee shop the next day. When I arrived, a man in his late 30s was waiting for me. He introduced himself as James. We sat down, and I recounted everything that had happened. James listened intently, then told me his story. He had also received pictures and videos of himself being tortured, with no memory of the events. He believed it was some sort of psychological experiment conducted by a group he referred to as the Watchers. James warned me that these people were dangerous and that they wouldn't stop until they had broken me completely. He suggested that I leave town, change my identity, and go off the grid. But I couldn't just run away. I needed answers. That night, I went home and started packing my things. I decided to take James's advice and disappear for a while. As I was packing, my phone buzzed again. Another text from the unknown number. "Do you remember now?" Attached was a picture of James, tied to a chair, his face bloody and bruised. My heart sank. They had gotten to him. I knew I had to leave immediately. I grabbed my bag and rushed out the door. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see a car following me. I drove for hours, not knowing where I was going. I just needed to get as far away as possible. Eventually, I found a small, secluded motel and checked in. I turned off my phone, hoping to disconnect from the nightmare that had become my life. For now, I'm safe. But I know it's only a matter of time before they find me again. I don't know who they are or what they want, but I do know one thing. I will never forget the terror in my own eyes in those pictures. On April 18th, my friends Mike and Jason and I decided to take on a 24-hour challenge at Costco. We were bored and looking for something exciting to do, and we had seen a few videos online where people attempted to stay inside big stores overnight without getting caught. It seemed like a fun idea at the time, so we decided to give it a shot. We planned everything out carefully. We chose a Costco outside of our city, figuring it would be less crowded and easier to pull off. We packed some snacks, water, and our phones, and headed to the store in the afternoon. Our plan was to blend in with the shoppers until closing time, then find a good hiding spot where we could stay unnoticed until the store opened the next morning. We wandered around the store, pretending to shop and making mental notes of potential hiding spots. As the evening approached, we decided on a spot in the back of the store behind a tall stack of toilet paper pallets. When the announcement came over the intercom that the store was closing in 15 minutes, we made our move. We slipped behind the pallets and crouched down, trying to make ourselves as small as possible. The store lights started dimming down, and we heard the sound of employees locking the doors and leaving for the night. Not gonna lie, we were pretty excited and nervous. We waited in silence for what felt like hours, listening for any signs of movement. The store had gotten super quiet, with only the faint sound of the refrigerators and other items. We were still surprised to have made it this far. Around midnight, we decided to explore a bit. We figured that the night shift employees, if there were any, would have finished their rounds by now. We carefully left from our hiding spot and started walking through the dark aisles, using the light from our phones. It was surreal being in such a massive store with no one else around. We laughed and joked around as we wandered through the different sections. We took snacks off the shelves and took silly photos of ourselves. It was fun for a bit. But next thing you know, as we were messing around in the furniture section, we heard a noise. It sounded like a person clearing their throat. We froze, straining to hear. We quickly ducked behind a display of sofas. We peeked out, trying to see who or what was making the noise. A man was walking down the aisle. He was wearing a dark hoodie with the hood pulled up, and he was carrying a large flashlight. No way he could have been a security guard. He kept shining his flashlight around as if he was searching for something. The man continued down the aisle, passing right by our hiding spot. We waited until he was out of sight, then quietly made our way back to our hiding spot behind the toilet paper pallets. We whispered to each other, trying to make sense of what we had just seen. Who was that guy? What was he doing here in the middle of the night? Then, all of a sudden, the guy pointed the flashlight in our direction, and for a split second, we thought he had found us. We almost gave up and showed ourselves because, at that moment, he touched one of the toilet papers in front of us. We all looked at each other and had the same idea. 3 versus 1. Thankfully, he stopped and continued to the next aisle. We decided it was best to stay put and not take any more risks. We sat there quietly for a while, and our feeling of excitement ended. Hours passed, and we tried staying awake, but the adrenaline had worn off, and we were exhausted. Sometime in the early morning, we heard the sound of the store's doors being unlocked. The first employees were arriving for the day. We waited until we were sure the coast was clear, then slipped out from behind the pallets and made our way to the front of the store. We acted like we were early shoppers, blending in with the small crowd waiting to enter. As we walked back to our car, we couldn't shake the feeling that we had narrowly avoided something dangerous. We never found out who the man in the hoodie was or what he was doing there. But one thing was clear, that man wasn't supposed to be there as well. We all agreed that this would have been our last 24-hour challenge. The thrill of the challenge wasn't worth the fear and uncertainty we had experienced. If you ever think about trying a 24-hour challenge in a big store, remember our story. Sometimes it's better to play it safe and leave the adventures to the professionals. About a year ago, I was driving back from a weekend trip visiting my parents in a small town about 4 hours away. I had left later than planned, and it was already getting dark by the time I hit the highway. The road was nearly empty, just me and the occasional truck speeding by. About an hour into my drive, my car started acting up. The engine light flickered on, and I felt the car lose power. I pulled over to the shoulder, hoping it was just something minor. I popped the hood and stared at the engine, but I didn't know what I was looking for. I wasn't a car guy, but I realized how important it was to know the basics. It was late, and my phone barely had any signal. I decided to wait for a passing car. After about half an hour, a pair of headlights approached and slowed down. It was an old pickup truck. The driver rolled down the window and asked if I needed help. He looked to be in his 50s, with graying hair. Relieved, I told him how my car broke down, and thankfully he offered me a ride to the nearest gas station, which he said was about 15 miles down the road. I hesitated for a moment, but then agreed, figuring I didn't have much choice. I locked my car and got into his truck. The interior was cluttered with old fast food wrappers and tools. As we drove, he made small talk, asking about my trip and where I was headed. I tried to stay polite, but something about him was off. About 10 minutes into the drive, the atmosphere shifted. The friendly small talk faded into silence. Sooner or later, he turned on the radio to break the awkwardness. A few songs played, but after that, a guy was speaking in a concerned voice. A news bulletin came on, describing an escaped convict from a nearby prison. They described him as dangerous, a second-degree murderer who had been on the run for days. The description they gave, graying hair, mid-50s, matched the man driving the truck. At this point, I was thinking about this guy a lot, but gave him the benefit of the doubt. I glanced at him out of the corner of my eye, trying to stay calm. He didn't react to the news, just kept his eyes on the road. My mind raced, trying to figure out what to do. I was in the middle of nowhere, with no cell signal and no idea how to get away. I subtly tried the door handle, but of course, it was locked. The sound must have been louder than I thought because he glanced at me and asked if everything was all right. I forced a smile and nodded, my heart racing even faster. Minutes felt like hours as I tried to come up with a plan. I noticed a rest stop sign coming up and quickly said I needed to use the restroom. He hesitated at first, but then nodded and pulled into the rest stop. As soon as the truck stopped, I bolted out, running toward the restroom. Inside, I locked the door and tried to think. I knew I couldn't stay there forever. I pulled out my phone and miraculously saw a single bar of signal. It was all or nothing at this point. I dialed 911 and whispered my situation to the operator. They told me to stay put and that they would send help. I waited in that restroom, my heart pounding with every passing second. I could hear the truck idling outside, the man probably wondering what was taking so long. After about 5 minutes, I heard sirens in the distance. Relief washed over me as I saw police lights flashing through the small restroom window. I stepped out, and the police were already approaching the truck. The man tried to drive off, but luckily they were able to block him off on time. I watched from a distance as they pulled him out and handcuffed him. One of the officers came over to check on me, and I explained everything. Later, I found out that he was indeed the escaped convict they had been looking for. He had a violent past, and who knows what could have happened if I hadn't managed to call for help. That experience taught me a huge lesson: the feeling of helplessness, the fear that gripped me when I realized who he was. I'm grateful I made it out, but the memory of that drive, the radio crackling with his description, and the tense ride to the rest stop is something I'll never forget.